working as a spokesperson, and those of you aspiring journalists who continue with journalism will learn that one of the key characteristics of spokespeople is that they like to talk. And I could stand here and talk to you for hours, but I might not address what you're interested in hearing about. So I usually, with groups like this, prefer to take questions. There's almost nobody that comes here that doesn't have questions. And that way I can address things that you're interested in hearing about. I always tell groups that because I do work with the news media for quite a long time, there's nothing I haven't heard, almost. So you can ask me whatever you want. You don't have to worry about asking stupid questions. They're usually the best ones. Sometimes they're the most difficult ones. I can't promise that you'll necessarily like everything I say, but I try to tell it the way it is, for the most part, as a representative of the Jewish community of Hebron. If I say something that's my opinion and not representative, I'll tell you that also. And you don't have to worry about offending me. It's very difficult to offend me, and if you do, that's why I carry a Gluck, So if people don't laugh, I know I have a problem. So, yes, ma'am.
Why do you carry a gun?
Carry a gun. People are licensed to carry weapons either through the Ministry of the Interior or through the Army in some cases for reasons of self-defense. And I suppose the simplest way to put it is that I know people that are alive today because they had a weapon, and I know people that are dead because they didn't. We live in a part of the world where you have to be able to either protect yourself or somebody else if something happens, if the need arises. I don't know, I've never been in a situation, but I have a feeling that if I were in a situation where I saw something happening to somebody else and I couldn't do anything, I don't know if there would be any more helpless a feeling. And that's why people... I saw a number the other day. I don't remember where. I should have written it down. I saw a statistic that says that 30% of the Israeli public, I assume adults, are armed. A lot of people... Yeah, I saw that. There are a lot of people that carry weapons, but I don't remember. Again, I don't remember where I saw that, but I did. But that's what I saw. In any case, that's why most people around here carry weapons.
Have you ever felt pressure where you?
Have I? No, I've never used it. I've never had to use it. No, look, for the most part, not all the time, but as a rule, if there are rules for such things, if you're involved yourself, if you're attacked in some kind of a terrorist attack, usually by the time you figure out what's going on, if you're still alive, it's over. So that the chances that you'll have the time to react, you have to be really, really good in order to react. There are times when that's not the case, and that's where there are people that have been able to save themselves or help other people. But usually, before you know it, for the most part, there are cases where it hasn't happened like that. But sometimes it's very difficult. But I've never had to use it. No, just for target practice.
Would it be used as more of a deterrent?
It's also acts as a deterrent, for sure. But it can act as a deterrent. But the primary reason is so that if God forbid you ever do need it for yourself, or if you're walking down the road and somebody screams and you see somebody else being attacked, you can try to do something to try to stop it.
In your position, advocating for the Jewish community, have you ever received any threats or...
Personally?
Yeah.
That's an interesting question. I don't think I've ever heard that before. No, not active threats. There are people that I've come in contact with, few of my neighbors that I'm sure would be very happy to see me disappear from the face of the earth. I've never been threatened by any of the Arabs here. Ironically, I won't say I've been threatened, but there are a lot of people, even within the community here, or likewise communities, that have absolutely no understanding of why I do what I do. And I won't say that they threaten me, but some of them are very unhappy that I talk to journalists and things like that. But I've never been threatened, no, to the best of my recollection. People as a rule don't like journalists. You should know that. It depends where you go, and I can tell you why. I can give you numerous examples. The latest example I have is of a woman who came in here. I didn't bring her in, actually. She didn't come through me. She came through a family here. We checked her out. We got recommendations from all sorts of places that she was good and this and that, and she was from Holland, and she actually came into Hebron over a period of 3 years for a month or so each time or whatever. Then it did a running story. At some point she did a trailer to try to raise money for the production she was doing, which I probably have someplace. I have to look for it. And when the final product came out, we were very upset because it was far, far, far from how she had led us on. And what she did was actually, I've seen a lot worse. It wasn't good, but it wasn't what we expected. But I've seen worse things. But that has happened to me numerous times, where you get in a journalist who comes in with highest recommendations from all sorts of people around, and then they do a butcher job on you. And I work with this, and I swallow it, and take some pills for my ulcer, and keep going with the blood pressure. But families, people that I go to and ask them to come speak to a journalist, they say, why should I? We've been burned so many times, nothing good is going to come out of it, or the chances of something good coming out of it are very, very slim. So, why bother? And then they don't agree. And then when you come to me and ask me, could we speak to a family? I say no, because nobody's willing to talk to you.
How is your current relationship with the leaders of the Arab community? Do you have dialogue with them?
Well, it depends what you call the leaders of the Arab community. Do we have relationships with any of the, I guess what you would call, municipal leadership in Hebron today? No, there's no contact whatsoever. As a matter of fact, I saw somebody the other day who does have contacts with them, and they said, if they'd ever like to, sit down and have a little talk, some of us would be willing to do it. We wouldn't do it for Facebook and for, our media things, but if they just want to sit down and chat, we'll sit down and chat with them. I don't think they're interested in chatting with us. We do.
Have you attempted to make contact?
Well, let me expand upon that a little bit. First of all, not just with the Arab leadership, with Arabs in general today, there's very little contact in Hebron. There used to be. If we go back, say, until the middle end of the 1980s, I won't say that everything was lovey-dovey, but there were personal relationships and there were business relationships between Jews and Arabs in Hebron. People used to be able to wander around the city. Arabs, we bought from the Arabs in the Kasbah and the stores out here, and there was all sorts of different contact. When I moved into Beit Hadassah almost 15 years ago, there's a guy across the street who has hands of gold, and I have two left hands, and I paid him a lot of money, and he came upstairs and did a lot of work in my house. The relationships between Jews and Arabs started to break down in a fairly massive way during the first Intifada, at the end of the 1980s, coming into the 1990s. People are unaware, but during that period of time there were over 1,000 Arabs that were killed by other Arabs because they were suspected of collaborating with Israel. So any Arab with any common sense stopped any public contact with Jews, because if somebody saw him talking to a Jew, then they might think he's a collaborator and kill him. And most of them aren't interested in dying. That led into into Oslo, and from Oslo and Hebron it led into the Hebron Accords in January of 1997, at which time Hebron was split. Most of the city was transferred to the Palestinian Authority, then Yasser Arafat. A little bit was left under Israeli security control, and at that point the Arabs basically thought they were going to get the whole thing. It's just a question of time. And I say that on two levels: the whole thing, all of Hebron, and on a little higher level, they thought that they were eventually, within a relatively short period of time, going to get most of Judea and Samaria, and eventually all of the state of Israel. And that, of course, led into the Second Intifada, what we call here the Oslo War, from the end of 2000. They started to shoot at us here from the hills that we'd given them. They shot at us until the middle of 2002. And that doesn't leave room for a whole lot of, positive contact. And that's basically the way things have stayed. We do have a very interesting relationship and dialogue with a sheikh who is the leader of the largest clan in Hebron. His name is Sheikh Jabari, Farid Jabari. Actually, I tried to reach him yesterday, say happy Ramadan to him, which I did last year. He calls me every once in a while and says Hag Sameach before the Jewish holidays. We obviously don't agree about a lot of things, but we do have an interesting dialogue. I've taken groups to see him, and to meet him, and to talk to him, and to have him talk to them. Other than that, though, today we have very little dialogue with any of them.
Do you think that the Arabs and the Jews live in peace, and if not, what the solution should be? And that could be either Hebron or Israel.
Okay, so first of all, understand that Hebron is not an isolated kind of a place. So, you can have different situations in different places between Jews and Arabs. Hebron is rather unique because it's the only city in Judea and Samaria where you've got Jews and Arabs basically living together, house next to house, and using the same streets and things like that. But can Jews and Arabs live together in peace? Theoretically, yes. Okay? But, just like other important things in life, it has to be mutual. It can't be one-sided. You say, you need two to tango. If one side wants peace and the other one doesn't, then it's very difficult to achieve it. So then I assume you ask me, you didn't ask me, but I assume your question is, so how do you reach that kind of a peace? There are several different factors that I think are necessary. First of all, the first side is dependent on us. When I say us, I mean Jews living primarily in Israel, and to some degree Jews living outside of Israel. But most importantly, first of all, the ones that live here. We first of all have to understand that we have a legitimate right to be here. And there are still people today that don't buy that, one way or another. Whether it's this kind of new Zionism kind of stuff that they're coming out with, trying to rewrite history a little bit. There are people that don't understand why we're here and what we're doing here, and they're not really sure if we should be here. And so then you have people that have doubts. Well, maybe we should give them Jerusalem, or maybe we shouldn't give them Jerusalem. And I saw a columnist the other day in the Jerusalem Post who wrote that, well, anybody that doesn't understand why Hebron is important can't understand why we're in Tel Aviv. And then a few paragraphs later he said, of course we shouldn't be living in Hebron today. Those kinds of, when Jews say that, then the Arabs understand that we're very mixed up. And basically it runs, I can go back to Jabari. Jabari, the last time I was there a few weeks ago with a group, he said, you Jews, you pick up the Bible and you say that God gave us this land, and I pick up the Quran and I say that Allah gave me this land. And he said more than that, and I can expand upon that a little bit later if you're interested. But basically, the Jews, there are a lot of Jews that They'd say, well, maybe he did give it to us, maybe he didn't give it to us, or it doesn't make any difference if he gave it to us or not. We have to share it, or maybe it doesn't belong to us. And the Arabs don't work that way. Anwar Sadat, back when they were discussing, Camp David, the beginning of Oslo, back the end of the 70s, the early 80s, he once said, I won't give up even 1 centimeter of my holy land. And he was talking about the sand in the Sinai. But for him, that's holy land, and he's not going to give him 1 centimeter of it. The Arabs look at us and they say, well, if you're willing to give us some of it, then that means you really don't believe it belongs to you, because if you did believe it belonged to you, you wouldn't give up anything, and if it doesn't belong to you, it belongs to us. And they're willing to take all of it. So if we don't get our stuff together, then they just eat it all up. The other side of that coin is that they have to accept the fact that we do have a legitimate right to live here, and they don't. They still reject that, and they reject that totally. And the examples I can give you of that are basically the continuation of the conversation with Sheikh Jabari, when he said to the group, I don't believe in Palestinian state, because I think that Allah gave me everything, and if He gave it to me, I can't give you anything, because He gave it to me. I don't have any permission to give it to you. In other words, so he goes on and explains, but this is something that's very common. You can go back, you can take one of these booklets later. There are sources in here. If any of you remember the name Faisal Husseini. Faisal Husseini was considered to be a moderate statesman, diplomat, highly respected. He was Arafat's right-hand man in the PLO, then later coming into the PA. And he was very, very highly respected by everybody. The last interview that he gave before he died in Egypt, he flew to Kuwait and had a heart attack and died. The last interview that he gave, the interview in Egypt, said, don't you believe in the Greater Palestine, i.e., all of what is today the State of Israel? And he said, of course I believe in the Greater Palestine. So he said, so how can you go to Oslo? By going to Oslo, you're giving them what belongs to us. He says, no. He said, Oslo is a Trojan horse. It's a way for us to get our foot in the door. And slowly by slowly, we'll eventually get the whole thing. And they still believe that today. And that's the primary reason why there won't be a Palestinian state, because they don't want it. Because if they did want it, then they'd already have it. Because back in when I don't remember what year it was, when Ehud Barak was prime minister and he met with Yasser Arafat at Camp David. Yeah, it was 2000. It was the middle of 2000, and he met with Arafat at Camp David, and I think Barak offered him, I think they give like 91% of Judea and Samaria and Gaza. He was offered more than he could ever dreamt of in his wildest dreams. And he said no, and he declared Second Intifada. And then later Olmert came back to Abu Mazen and he offered him 93 or 94%, and Abu Mazen said no. Why did they say no? They say no because they can't accept the legitimacy of a Jewish state. Once they accept a Palestinian state, they have to sign that they accept the legitimacy of the state of Israel, and they cannot do that. And that's why it won't happen. But until we get our stuff together, and then maybe they'll start to get their stuff together, then we can find a way somehow to live together.
What do you think about the idea of the two-state solution?
I'm fully in favor of it. We get Israel and they get Palestine, Texas. There's a big city in Texas called Palestine, so they can go. Oh, you don't. Everybody always laughs when I say that. Okay, look. Of course I say that cynically. There are people who get very upset. Truth is, I don't give a damn. Look, so now I'll tell you what the real answer is. Let's forget the religious stuff for a minute. God gave me. Let's just take a look for a moment at the State of Israel on a map. So up north, we've got some really good friends called Hezbollah that have already shot thousands of rockets into Israel, and according to Israeli intelligence, probably already have some chemical weapons. One of their bunkers blew up once, and there was a lot of stuff that blew up in there. That's what we have on our northern border. We come down a little bit to Syria. I don't have to say anything about Syria today. Everybody knows what's going on in Syria. Come down a little bit more, we get to Jordan. Jordan today is still stable. According to various analysts, they're next on the list. When Assad goes, then they're next. And the king knows that. Coming down, we come to Egypt. I don't have to say anything about Egypt today. Everybody knows what's going on in Egypt also, with the Brotherhood and with the chaos and with the civil war, and who knows what's going to happen there. And then we come up a little bit, and we've got Hamas that are also shooting rockets into Israel. And that's ignoring Iran, a little bit back there behind Syria, that's still trying to put together. This morning they came out with reports that by 2015 they'll be able to start testing intercontinental ballistic missiles, which aren't just going to be able to hit Israel, they'll probably be able to hit California, or at least Europe. And that's what Israel is surrounded by. We've only got one other side, Mediterranean, in the west. To accept a Palestinian state is to create another enemy state, which takes the borders of Israel and turns some of them into, about 10 miles wide. It's suicide. You've got to be crazy. It makes no sense. Just to give you a little idea of what we're talking about. I don't know how much you've traveled around Israel, but if you go up to the northern Samaria region, it's all hills. It's called Gavahar. You go all the way up on the hills, you look west, you can see the Mediterranean. On a nice day, you can see the Mediterranean. It's really pretty there. You can see from Netanya in the north all the way down to Ashkelon. See. אני עם קבוצה עכשיו, בסדר תהיינו עוד איזה חצי שעה. האוטו כאן בחוץ. טוב. You can see from Netanya down to Ashkelon. On a really nice day, without, too powerful a scope, you can see the planes landing and taking off Ben Gurion Airport. Now, if that's part of a Palestinian state, then my good friend Yusuf's son, when he's 15 years old, and they give him a birthday present, this little Stinger missile thingy. And he takes it outside, and he puts it on his shoulder, and he says, wow, there's an airplane, and he lines up the laser, and he goes zap. One airplane, 300 people on it, who in their right mind is going to come to Israel? And it's not my imagination. Israeli intelligence is trying to figure out how they're going to deal with this. And I can tell you, with all of the different technical things they're thinking about, I know what the answer is. There's only one way to deal with that. Only one way. And that's to move the airport. Very simple. You can't leave it there. So then you say, we're going to move the airport to. So if you move it up north, then you're in line with Hezbollah, and if you move it down south, you're in line with Hamas in Egypt. So there's another solution. You stop using airplanes, we go back to taking cruises. Use boats. But that's the situation, and that's real. It's not my imagination. That's what we're talking about. And keeping in mind that every time Israel has given them land, the only thing we get back are dead people. So why should we do it again? That's a Palestinian state. That's the security side of a Palestinian state, and that's why also it's never going to happen, not because of them, but because of us, because people are starting to wake up. And they're starting to realize that, and despite the fact that you'll see a little bit different things here and there, it's almost a dead issue, and everybody knows that.
So if you don't want to say Palestinian state, would you then prefer, are you saying that it should stay as an occupied territory or under control of Israel? Do you think that would be better?
What occupied territory? You mean, who's occupying it? Them or us? You're right, some of them are occupying a lot of our land. Look, what I think today is a very difficult question. The situation that we deal with is very, very complex. Okay? You can't talk about black and white. We're dealing with very, very difficult issues. We're dealing on all sides. Okay? I'm not ignoring the rest of the world. I'm not ignoring the issues that they have. Very, very complicated issue. I say this more coming from me than representatively, because it's not something we've ever discussed in the community, and I have no doubt that there will be differing opinions. I think that today probably the only way to really alleviate the issues we have is to have one state, and you basically make everybody citizens. Okay, so people say, so how can you put Arabs in the Knesset? We already have Arabs in the Knesset. Today we have Arabs in the Knesset that are working for the Palestinian Authority. There's a woman in the Knesset who was on the Marmara when our soldiers went down. She was helping the terrorists who were trying to kill them. So there'll be a few more in the Knesset. There has to be, there are conditions. First of all, people have to accept the framework of the State of Israel, and they have to stop trying to kill us. They also have to accept the same obligations, responsibilities that I have. I pay taxes. They have to pay taxes too. I don't expect Arabs to go into the army and fight against other Arabs, but they have to do some kind of community service. But I think that today that's not untenable. It's not something that's totally, out of space. It's not science fiction. It's something that I think could happen, and in the end may very well happen.
If Arabs were to accept the possibility of a one-state solution and go with all the guidelines you provided, national service and accepting taxation, would Israel then concede to allowing itself to become more than a Jewish state, to allow Islam as a part of that framework, or to make it a non-theological state?
Look, first of all, Israel isn't a theological state. Okay? No, it's not.
Like right now with the Knesset.
No. I don't think so. I think we're far, despite what I might want personally or what other people might talk about, we're far from turning into a halachic state. Okay? Just about all of the states, and if you want to talk about religious states, so look at the Brotherhood in Egypt and look at what's going on in other parts of the world. Look at Iran and the other states around here that really are, where a kid steals a loaf of bread, they chop his hand off. We're far from that. I don't see Israel at the moment, in any case, unless Mashiach comes tomorrow, and then I don't know what's going to happen either, Israel turning into a theological state. We still have Knesset, people are still voted in by majority. Arik Sharon, even though he had a minority, managed to push through Gush Katif. Yitzhak Rabin managed to push through Oslo. If Israel was a theological state based on halacha, a lot of those things wouldn't have happened at all. Israel is a Jewish state, period. And it's always going to be a Jewish state. In other words, I'll answer your question. I heard what you asked. Israel is the only state we have. And the nature of Israel as it was founded and as it was created is as a Jewish state. Okay? In other words, it has a Jewish, I don't know what you would call it, atmosphere, I don't know what. People, I suppose one of the primary legal results of that is that the law of return. A Jew from anywhere in the world can come over here. If I'm an Irishman and I go live in the United States and I want to become an American citizen, I've got to live there for 10 years and I have to do courses and pass tests and everything else. And then if they accept me, I can be an American. Here, any Jew that comes from give me a chance, comes back over here can be an Israeli. And that doesn't happen with others. This is the only place that we have. This is the only one it is. That doesn't mean that other people can't live here. Doesn't mean that the Arabs can't the Muslims can't celebrate Ramadan and the Christians can't celebrate Christmas. There's no need for discrimination or different funding for education, or this one gets more for their social services and I don't know whatever else. But the state as a Jewish state will always remain a Jewish state. That's an essential, integral part of what we are here. And that's never going to change. And that'll have to be accepted too.
I have a question that goes along that though. So by making it a one-state solution and making the Arabs citizens, wouldn't that make it an Arab majority?
No. First of all, there are a number of sources. I don't have all the numbers in my head. I'm not good with numbers. But I'll give you, you can take later on, when you take this, there are some sources in here, and there's also an article which you can take, which I put back there also, by Dr. Guy Bachor, dealing with population rates. First of all, today in Israel there are 6 million Jews. According to the numbers that I've seen today, the stats of, first of all, nobody really knows how many Arabs there are in Judea and Samaria. Nobody's ever really been able to count them. Dr. Guy Bachor here uses the results from the last election, when there were about 500, he says there were 515,000 adults that voted. He adds on to that the same number of kids. So you've got a million plus Arabs, a million something Arabs in Judea and Samaria today. They're not going to catch up to us so fast. They're not going to catch up to us primarily because the Jewish birth rate is going up and the Arab birth rate is going down. And the reason the Arab birth rate is going, and it's statistic. It's not. I'm not making up the numbers. You can check them out yourselves. And again, look, when you're dealing with numbers, it's very difficult because it's very easy to make up numbers, and it's very difficult to play whatever game you want with numbers. Everybody knows that. I use statistics that I have that I think, from people that I think are honest, and I think the statistics are accurate. Somebody finds something else that they can prove to me that they're wrong, I'm interested in seeing it. But today the Arab birth rate is going down. Why is it going down? For a couple of reasons. Number one, the women, and I'm exaggerating a little bit, but the women used to get married when they were 14 or 15, and then they could have 20 kids. Maybe 15 of them would live. Today, the women are, and it wasn't that much. Okay, I'm throwing it up, but today the women are getting an education, and they're starting to learn about things, careers, and high tech, and fashion, and I don't know what everybody else learns, what everybody else studies, journalism, and they don't want to get married when they're 14 and have 20 kids because they want to work. Because they understand they can make some money and they can do something, and women want to do that too, and so that the Arab birth rate is falling, and it's not just falling here; it's falling all over the Arab world. And you read this article that Dr. Guy Bachor wrote, and you can see some of it inside. The Israeli birth rates, particularly the birth rate in Judea and Samaria, percentage-wise, is amongst the highest in the world. It's going up. According to his numbers here, in Judea and Samaria in 2000, there were 190,000 Jews. Today, without Jerusalem, there are about 400,000, and with it, Jerusalem, he says there are 700,000. There are a lot of people here, and the numbers are going up. And that doesn't take into account another factor, which I think is extremely important, and that is the Jews that are going to be coming to Israel in the next 30 to 50 years from the United States, Europe, South Africa, and Australia. I have a feeling, I expect, without trying to be a prophet, that within the next 50 years you're going to have between 10 to 12 million Jews in Israel and not 6 million.
But at the same rate, so the Jewish birth rate is going up, but are you attributing that to ultra-Orthodox?
Excuse me?
Are you attributing that birth rate to ultra-Orthodox Jews? And if so, how is Israel going to afford to have that birth rate be so exponential, since they live off?
Look, first of look, I don't know where you get your assumptions from. Okay, I don't know what ultra-Orthodox is. I have 7 kids and 20 grandchildren. I work. Okay, nobody pays me for the kids. I work to feed them. I'm talking about. I don't know who lives off of anybody. I think it's a lot of bubamaisis. But what I do think is that when I talk about the population in Judea and Samaria, you're not talking about the kinds of the people you're talking about that live up in Mea Shearim in Jerusalem. Okay, I'm talking about people like me for the most part. Okay, and the birth rate amongst secular Jews is going up also. You know, people that would have 1 or maybe 2 are having 3 or 4. You know, it's individual. It's not, you know, there's not a scale where people are told this is, you know, what you got to do. But statistically, that's what's happening, and I think it's going to continue to happen. But I think the major factor in the increase in Israeli population is going to be with massive aliyah that's going to be taking place in the next 50 years. And then we're going to, and that nobody takes into account. I think it's a major factor that people forget.
What type of Jews live in Hebron? Do they tend to be very political or ideological?
We have horns. That's why we have these big kippahs on.
Look, the people that live here, first in terms of where we come from. In Hebron today, I don't know, the last time I counted, it's more or less up to date. I don't know, it changes a little bit here and there, but of the adult population here, about 75% are native Israelis. In other words, people who were born in Israel. The other 25% are divided sort of in half, about 12% from the States, another 12% from around the world, from all sorts of other places. Russia, Ethiopian family, Iran, France, England, I don't know where else we have people here from. So that's basically, and that's approximate because it shifts here and there, but that's approximately what we have in terms of adult population. The people that live here, the families are more or less all religious. Okay? You name it. We've got Chabad and Breslov and Rav Kook and this one and that one and whatever you could possibly want, we've got a little bit of it here. People politically active? There are people that are and there are people that aren't. There's a woman from Hebron in the Knesset now. There are people that don't have anything to do with politics, and politically active also has different forms of expression. You know, like I don't consider myself to be politically active. In other words, I'm not active with any political parties, but I guess that you could call a lot of what I do and write and say as political. So it depends how you define it. But there are people, you know, the people here are normal people. People get up in the morning and the men go to pray someplace and they eat breakfast and they go to work and the kids go to school and the women either go to work or they stay home and take care of the kids or they do both and at night, you know, everybody comes home, they eat dinner, play with the computer, read a book, learn something, go to sleep. That's, you know, it's normal for the most part. There is also abnormal, but that's generally the way of life. Depending on how old you are and how much energy you are. So, you know, sometimes you go home and you want to go out to a meeting or you want to do this, you want to do that. But it's fairly normal. I don't think that it's... I've never tried to measure, you know, stats or anything like that about what people do when they come home at night. But there are some people whose jobs are politically motivated. The kind of work that I do, and that's where I spend my life. I can spend 18 hours a day doing it. There are people that there's a guy here who puts windows into houses. And, you know, so I don't know when he comes home at night what he does. I don't think he goes to political meetings. But, you know, each to his own.
So you say that should be one state and everyone should be one citizen. But how good is Israel and all that? I met a Palestinian family, and they have no aggression towards Jews. They're a peaceful family, and they do more than become citizens. How do you think Israel could, obviously they don't really accept people as citizens who want to destroy Israel and their own country. How could that even be possible? There's a lot of Palestinians that would be happy to become citizens and not
First of all, you're right. Okay, and I've heard things like that. A lot of people like that aren't willing to say it publicly because they're afraid to say it, because then somebody will chop off their head. Seriously. No, I didn't say. I didn't say everybody. I said that there are people like that. I know a friend of mine last year was at a seminar, and they went to an Anglican church in East Jerusalem, and I don't know what he is, priest, minister, whatever he is, spoke to them at the end. My friend asked him a question. He calls himself, he's a Christian, so he calls himself a Palestinian Christian. And my friend said to him, okay, so now you've got a Palestinian state, you're going to go live there? And he said, hell no, I want to stay in Israel. I didn't say that everybody, but there are a lot of people that are afraid. If you talk to people in Hebron, for the most part, people that would think that they'd be afraid to say it because, somebody might get upset with them and kill them. That's what they do sometimes when they get upset. Look, I haven't ironed out all the details. Like I said, I introduced that whole thing by saying we're dealing with very, very complicated issues, and it's very difficult to look. What I said earlier about what happened with Jabari, with what he said about holding up the Bible and the Quran, Israelis say the same thing. Okay, for example, David Ben-Gurion in 1936, Appeal Commission, I think it was Appeal Commission, they asked him, as the head of the Jewish community in Israel and pre-state Israel, they said, what's your legitimate right to be here? Now, David Ben-Gurion was not a religious guy. He didn't walk around with a big kippah on his head. And he picked up the Bible on the table and he said this. In other words, the issue that we're dealing with is a religious issue. It's very, very complicated. It's religious, and it goes back a long time. It's very deep-rooted, and you can't just snap your fingers and make it go away and find solutions to all the problems. I can hope that if and when the time comes that there is a way to deal with it on the table, sort of openly, and that there's enough respect amongst everybody for one another, that these kinds of issues can be dealt with in some kind of sane way. Ask me how. I don't know. One of my friends says make them sign everybody has to sign an allegiance paper. Does it mean anything, signing a piece of paper? No, it doesn't. But, I don't know. Look, most of these kinds of things, there's no way you can look into a crystal ball and figure out exactly what's going to happen. You can only learn from the past. That's why I don't live in 1929, but I have to learn from 1929. I don't have to live in the Holocaust, but I have to learn from the Holocaust. I don't have to live in 1993 Oslo, but I have to learn from that. And that means that if I learn from that, and I have a little bit of intelligence, then I have to try not to make the same mistake I've already made again, and again, and again, and again, and again. But somewhere you have to try. Any trial, there's some kind of you're taking a chance. So then you have to measure what chance you're taking, what it could cost you, and what you might gain from it. Very difficult.
I think these will be the two last questions.
How do you view, I guess, the secular push towards interfaith marriage within Israel?
The secular push for interfaith marriage? I didn't know there was such a thing. I didn't know there was such a thing.
You mean is Jews and Arabs married?
Jews, Christians, Muslims.
Look. First of all, I'm not familiar with that kind of thing. No,
That's what you're doing about it. I just see it as like it's going to eventually be.
Okay, so look, I don't think that Israel, as I know Israel, even the secular people in Israel are going to ever view positively intermarriage. Okay, intermarriage is very clearly a poison which is very destructive to the Jewish people. It's destroying intermarriage and assimilation in the United States and Europe is disintegrating Judaism. And the whole idea of Israel as a Jewish state is to keep it alive. That doesn't mean that everybody has to act the same way. There isn't religious coercion. You know, I don't go out and force people to put on tefillin in the morning and tell them they don't keep Shabbos, then I'm going to kill them. Okay? We don't live like that. But I think the idea of any favorable outlook, we try to any. I don't deal with it. It's not a subject that I deal actively with today. But I know people that do, and anybody that can work to try to stop it. Okay, and there are groups and organizations that do try to prevent it, primarily with Israeli women that marry Arabs and then find themselves stuck, like in jails, and they try to either prevent them from marrying them or try to help them get them out when they eventually want to get out. But that's something that I think is a common denominator across the board.
You said earlier that you deny Israel is a theological state, but you keep bringing up like the basis for the claim to Israel from Ben Gurion, pointing to a faith-based book, and then you also talk about interfaith marriage as being a poison to Israel and a poison, and you have to keep Judaism alive in order to maintain the state.
But there's a big difference because a theological state is when you've got a Khomeini or something like that who says, you know, if the women go outside without a veil on, then they're going to chop their heads off. Or if a woman is accused of adultery, they put her in a pit, they cover up to her waist, and they throw rocks at her until she's dead, which is what they do in Saudi Arabia. We don't do that here. Okay, that's a theological look. A theological state has absolutely nothing to do with trying to prevent intermarriage. Look, today we're also not going around and shooting people who do marry out. Okay? And Jews have never done that. Back in the past, there were fathers who would sit shiva on their daughters or their sons if they married out. But nobody, as far as I know, at least in the last 1,000 years or so, nobody ever, killed them. Theological state is a state where which you see in states around us, where you want to talk about a theological state, go into Hebron, walk down the road here, 1.5 kilometers, and see ask what happens today to a 14-year-old boy who walks around in the streets eating a sandwich. Okay? Well, what happens if there's an Arab woman in Hebron that goes outside with a cigarette? Hebron is a huge city. There are 17,000 factories over there. They have factories and hospitals and universities and everything else. So you go look for a movie theater in Hebron. There aren't any. There aren't any because they won't let them. That's theocratic. That's taking people and forcing them to do what I want them to do. Because that's what I believe God is telling us to do. And we don't do that. And Israel hasn't done that yet, and I don't see it in the near future.
As a state that you don't accept intermarriages, isn't that itself?
What do you mean we don't accept? What do you mean we don't accept intermarriages? If Joe and Christine are living together and they say they got married somewhere, nobody's breaking into their house, burning it down, and telling them they have to leave. The fact that Israel will not marry people that way. There are Jewish elements to the state of Israel. I don't deny that, and we believe that's the way it should be. But Christians can get married, And Jews can get married and Muslims can get married. The fact that there are certain laws that have been set up, I would say it doesn't have a Jewish taste to it, but it's far, far from being a theological state.
But it's not discriminatory.
Is it discriminatory? These are laws in the Knesset. It's not pushed. It's not an Ayatollah who's pushing it down everybody's throats. Democracy. Everybody wants democracy, but sometimes people want democracy as long as it's good for me, and the democracy goes in his direction, so it's not good. You got to make up your mind. It can work in both directions. I think that Linda wants me to wrap up, so let's take one more question, and then you want to ask the last one?
Can I switch focus on this? I just want to talk about you've got a huge glass blowing industry in Hebron.
There's an Arab glass blowing. It's not on us.
Arab, it's not Jewish?
No.
Okay, that's what I was
No. They have I've been in some. I was about a half a year ago in one of the glass factories on the other side of the city. I have pictures of it. Beautiful work over there. But there was in the distant past, it was part of Jewish industry here. But today it's all Arab. We don't have anything to do with it today. Look, let me finish like this, because I have to let you go. First of all, you're all welcome to take one of these things. Deals with a lot of the questions that you've asked and things you haven't asked. You're more than welcome to take one. Anybody who wants my card can have a card. There's also this page with Guy Bechore's article in English, which you can take back there. The last thing I'll say to you, just as journalists or aspiring journalists or whatever, usually I start with this, with groups that aren't even journalists, but for you it's much more important. When you speak to anybody, and it makes no difference if it's me, or it's Yusuf, or it's anybody anywhere else in the world, people speak to you on two different levels. You can ask me what I think about something and I'll give you my opinion. What do you think about a two-state solution? And so my opinion is my opinion. So maybe I'm representing somebody, maybe I'm not representing somebody, but it's my opinion. You can ask me another kind of question, which is facts. And I tell you that I woke up this morning and I opened the shades and I saw outside my window a pink elephant flying outside in the sky, and it was beautiful. And you all write it down in your notebooks. But then somebody says, wait a minute, do you really see that? You have a picture of it? Maybe it didn't happen. When you speak to people about opinions, they're opinions. When you speak to people about facts, you don't have to believe them just because they said it. Okay, it doesn't matter who they are. It doesn't make any difference whether it's me or Yusuf or Dawid or anybody or Muhammad. Okay, just because somebody says something doesn't mean it's gospel truth. And you can always check things out. And you should check things out. If you want to be a good journalist, check it out. Check me out. I tell people, I tell the truth. I don't have anything to lie about. You catch me saying something that's not right, you let me know. But the same thing is true with everybody else around here. Whether it be on the right, on the left, up, down, wherever they are. Because not everything people say to you is truth. And if you base what you write on things just because somebody said it, then you're going to find yourselves in big holes. Because a lot of what people tell you isn't necessarily truth. You can check it. And if there's no proof for it, then ask yourselves, there are things you can't find proof for. But today, I don't want to throw out percentage-wise, most of what people are going to say is fact. I say that Faisal Husseini says this, so check it out. You can find it up on the web. The sources are here. Anything else people say, check it out. Just because they say it doesn't mean it's true. Good luck to all of you. Thank you for coming in.